Dr. Louise Lambert is a positive psychology researcher, educator, and consultant whose work focuses on the science of happiness and well-being. She has spent more than 2 decades studying how people can flourish with a particular interest in applying positive psychology within healthcare settings. Her research explores the links between happiness, mental health, physical health, and quality of life, including pioneering work in primary healthcare. Dr. Louise is passionate about translating scientific findings into practical tools that help individuals and organizations thrive. Through her teaching, research, and public engagement, she advocates for making well-being a measurable, evidence-based priority rather than just an afterthought. Please help me welcome her to the show.
Let's do it.
So, Dr. Louise Lambert, thank you so much for being here with me today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking.
So, let's just jump into it. First, I want to ask you, what is the definition of happiness?
Yeah, it's a tricky word. And just to help people out, I think it's better to think about it in this way. There's the scientific definition, and then there's the social media definition. So the social
Mm.
media definition is
That
whatever
should
you
be
want
for,
it to
not to
mean.
interrupt you, but that should be for
For
everything,
everything,
actually.
exactly. And then the definition in science, we actually don't even use that word because, quite right, it doesn't mean anything. There's no scientific definition to happiness. So instead, we use what's called subjective well-being, which sounds far more boring, but really it's just do you feel your life is worth living? So there's an aspect of life satisfaction. And then there's also an aspect of how do you experience life? So the experience of positive emotions relative to negative emotions. So
Mm.
that's an easy way of saying how many positive emotions do you experience in a day compared to how many negative ones do you experience in a day. So it doesn't mean negative should be at zero, but generally we want the ratio. We want more positive emotions than negative emotions. And when we get to that state, whatever that state is, that's what we would define as happiness or subjective well-being.
Mm. Very interesting. Some things that I've read or when I've been listening to certain podcasts and people talk about happiness, and some people have said we shouldn't talk about happiness because everyone's definition is different and it's not tangible enough, or we should be talking about joy or something else. Because if you ask people what they want in life, and oftentimes people will say they want to be happy,
Mhm.
but maybe it's that people don't necessarily understand exactly what that means to them or what it should mean to them,
Or just how to get it. Because
how to get
somewhere,
it.
somewhere we know, this feels good or this does not feel good. Like we intuitively have that experience, which tells you this is great, do more of it. I don't like this, stop doing that. And collectively, that kind of forms or gives us clues, if you will, to, where does life feel better and how, doing what, with who, and when does it feel worse with those same factors involved. And so somehow we know kind of what feels good, what doesn't, but what differs, and to your point, this notion of our personal definition. So for me, I love playing tennis. Now, anybody watching or listening would probably not think that is true because I tend to get angry but it makes me happy. But for somebody else, that might be their idea of like a worst day ever, and they prefer yoga and reading. So how you achieve that? Yes, that looks different for everybody. But the definition, again, positive emotional experiences relative to negative ones. And does your life feel satisfying? So that's an easy yes or no. That's a mathematical equation. And how that gets done, that's where we define that on our own.
Hmm. And in a lot of, because you work with a lot of companies and different things like this, and there's a lot of talk in this day and age about corporate health and wellness and how companies are very excited to support that. I often find that that is sometimes one of health related things or these untangible things like education and corporate health and wellness are often the first things to go in a budget cut. I believe you would beg to differ with that. And so, why do you feel, or why is it so that happiness should be taken more seriously?
So I'll spin it this way. If governments prioritize happiness, it means there's a return on that investment. And every single government in this part of the world, in the GCC, has the explicit word happiness in their national vision. And that's not
Nice.
there by accident. That's not just a, oh, we want you to be happy. But we want you to be happy because we know the research literature is very clear on this. And not just the research, over there, but even in the region, I've done studies on this, and you've read them as well. Lots of evidence showing that when kids, for example, are happier, they learn better. The GPAs actually increase. When individuals, patients are happier, they reach their health outcomes faster. And we'll talk about that today. When employees are happier, they are more productive. When organizations are happier, they are more profitable. When societies as a whole are happier, they are less likely to revolt in the streets. They are more likely to support governments. They're more likely to follow the law. They're even more likely to save money. So there's a lot of evidence supporting a state of happiness that is very well understood at government levels. Where it's maybe less well understood is at the corporate level, where it ends up being sometimes, eh, questionable activities of dubious return. Um, but certainly at the individual level, people also understand why happiness matters. So we have more or less degrees of awareness, but also understanding around the why. And I think the why is important because when people don't understand the why, we end up doing things just to do them. And it's not really connected to what is our purpose, what's the outcome we're looking for, what is the return that we could get on these initiatives. And sometimes we end up doing things that maybe aren't rooted in the evidence of science, if you will. Now, that doesn't mean they don't work, but there are perhaps things that would work better when we rely on evidence-based tools and practices and initiatives, interventions, and so forth.
And I'll get to some of the health and individual questions, but I think one of the words you said is really important for a lot of people, and that's return on, well, that's more than one word, return, but return is the key word. Return on
Yeah.
investment, return on the time spent. How should people or governments, corporations, bodies, more than, collectively, how should people be measuring that? I mean, of course, they see it in the bottom line, but how can they make the connection knowing that it was a result of people being happier or a program that they implemented to get people more interested in their happiness and health?
Yeah. And I think measurement is the key word here because if you're not measuring, you have no way of knowing if something worked or not. So people might say, that was a really great afternoon, or, oh, I never thought about it that way after they listened to a webinar. But that doesn't mean just because people liked something that there's a return on that. And the return is a change in behavior. A return is an improvement in how people feel, which allows them to behave differently. A return might be, again, a change in how people feel, which allows them to perceive other people differently and interact differently. And when people, just a simple example, when people collaborate better at work, they're more productive. So it is important to measure, and that's how we get to see the ROI of well-being. So increasingly companies are getting more sophisticated around this, where they are doing pre-measures of people's well-being levels. They're also doing post. So it's harder to do if your well-being intervention is just, a series of webinars, for example, that might not really get you the returns because information generally doesn't change behavior. If it did, we'd have no smokers, we'd all sleep well, we'd all be at the gym. Um, and when we think about well-being, there's also measures that we can use, again, from the research literature that capture what well-being is. So there's a number of different indices. There's a number of different empirically validated scales that can be used. These are free. They're just all in the research literature. So there's no need to invent something. And when researchers use those scales, those measures, that's when we're very much able to see there's a return. In terms of the behaviors, the productivity, performance, profitability, that stems as a direct result of people's mood and behavior changing. So the ROI is important, the numbers matter, because for one, they're there, but two, it is how we convince people. So just feeling good is nice, but you know, it's hard to sell something to an executive team just around feeling good.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And right, and we should all feel good. But so earlier you talk about how happiness is how you express positive emotion. And I'm assuming this has a lot to relate to positive psychology and some of those concepts. Could you tell us a little bit about positive psychology and how that is different from traditional psychology?
Yeah, and it's very different. So when we think about the psychology most people understand, the first thing they think of is mental health issues, depression, anxiety, misery, divorce, eating disorders. I mean, the list goes on and on. And mainstream psychology generally tackles problems. And that's good because when you have a problem, it feels bad and you want it fixed. So historically, psychology has focused on distress, dysfunction, disease, disability, basically things that are not working well. And we've diagnosed people through what's called the DSM, Diagnostic and
Mhm.
Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's a book that's this big.
Hmm.
Um, and and look, I do not recommend anybody reads it because you will read it and go, wow, I have 27 new diseases I didn't know about. Every
Yeah.
single thing is found in that book.
It's more for insurance reimbursement now
Yes,
and not so
exactly.
much for bedtime reading,
Yeah,
unless you
it
want to fall
definitely.
asleep quickly.
Yes. Um, and that has served a very good purpose. So I'm not, criticizing
Hmm.
mainstream psychology. We need that. But it became clear probably about 20, 25 years ago that gosh, like there's more to life than just not being miserable. And in fact, it's not enough. So if we're only reducing depression, reducing anxiety, helping people not get divorced, like that's good, but surely we can do better. We have science that can help people live great lives. And great is maybe a tall order, but at least lives that they are excited to get up in the morning to live, lives where they experience positive emotions, far fewer negative emotions, lives where they experience meaning, purpose, where they get to act on their best self and use their character strengths, where they get to engage with life instead of just, watch it go by like a participant, where they can actually improve the relationships and make them better, not just less bad. So positive psychology really came out of that notion that there's a lot more that science can do if we just ask better questions. So probably about 25 years ago, positive psychology started, and it wasn't that new. I mean, it had been talked about probably for many years, but now we actually attach science to it. So rather than just study depression, anxiety, all of these things, now we use the same empirically validated methods in science to really start to put numbers, statistics, strategies, interventions, treatment, treatment manuals, if you will, but treatment for how to get a better life. And we've developed a number of different interventions. So again, not just how to be less miserable, but how to develop more joy, more curiosity, more, how to use capitalization in our relationships to build intimacy. So it's a whole, basically it's the other side of human experience that psychology has typically ignored for so long, but from a very scientific perspective. And that is really mind-blowing. I know for the average person, they're like, I thought that's what psychology always did. Here's a secret. No. Um, but the implications are really big because if we think about who goes to see a psychologist, first of all, you need a problem. And I know because I used to teach, I used to teach, I used to do research, but I was a psychologist for many years. And the worst clients would come in and say, "Oh no, I'm doing really well. I just want to do better." And all I could say was, "Well, come back when you have a problem. Like I can't help you. I need a problem to work with." Positive psychology changed that. Instead of only having clients who came in with problems and at any given moment, major problems, it's about 1 in 5 people who are struggling with a mental health issue. But what that means is what are the other 4 in 5 supposed to do? We have nothing for them. Now, with positive psychology, we have something for the 1 in 5 and the 4 in 5. Effectively, we have scientific strategies that can help everybody live a better life. So you don't need to wait to have a problem. In fact, it's better that you don't, because once you do, treatment is a lot harder. But
Hmm.
we can do prevention. We can also do promotion. And both promotion of good mental health acts as prevention for mental health issues. So positive psychology, and people kind of confuse it. They stick to the word positive and they think, oh, it's thinking positive. It's got nothing to do. Just ignore the word positive. It's really just, again, the other half of human experience that is taken as seriously as the unhappy side of human experience. And those strategies are now being used in education, in work, government policy, healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. So that is the main difference.
Yeah, I like that people are embracing it more. And you're right. Sometimes it is hard to explain to people what it is. When after my first coaching certification, and even some doctors, like clinically, I was just going over some statistics. So, like 10, 20 years ago, there was only a handful of research studies about positive psychology or coaching in healthcare. Now there's hundreds of thousands, which is fantastic. But in the beginning, people were like, "You mean like motivational speaking? Like exactly what
Pizza
does it
pop
mean?"
party.
Yeah,
Oh,
or it was
yeah.
like, too much woo or something. So it's so refreshing that people are starting to embrace it and take it more seriously. So then based on that, and then because we're, all usually a lot of people listening are in healthcare, how does that relate to our healthcare outcomes, positive psychology or happiness and healthcare outcomes? How are they related?
Yeah. So again, there's a lot of research being done looking at happiness on health, but also happiness interventions on health. And these studies have been done equally in the workplace, schools, institutional, but again in healthcare. And there's a huge link. So healthcare is where we've done lots of research looking at, and again, we're doing this a little bit historically, but now we're all in on well-being. So looking at things like optimism, for example, when people are more optimistic, there's a direct impact on longevity, and it's up to 11-year difference. That's massive. So simply by being more optimistic in life, you can extend your longevity by 11 years. No pill does that. So there's a lot of research being done on optimism. Gratitude is another one, and we've done a lot of studies there in patients with cardiovascular disease, also cancer, and then of course depression as well, which is considered a disease. And again, very good outcomes there. So we're starting to test some of these tools in healthcare, and we're seeing really good outcomes, way better than simply, well, go take this pill and, lie on your couch for the next 6 weeks and let's wait and see what happens. We can be much more proactive and help patients, but even just, again, regular people to improve their state of health. So again, lots of research showing that when people are happier, and that happiness mechanism, again, I'm using the word happiness, but it's subjective well-being is that scientific word, and that's what we use in those research studies. But when people are happier, we know that one of the mechanisms is simply on their behavior. So when people are happier, they're less likely to smoke. They are more likely to do physical activity. They are more likely to sleep. And sleep, these things sound kind of wimpy, but actually, if you want to increase your longevity, if you want to just have a good life, those three things right there will take you straight through to the end with a minimum of problems. So they're more important than they sound. Happier people, and I've written a little list here for myself from one of the studies we just finished doing, but happier people are also more likely to eat fruits and vegetables. Go
Mm,
figure. So even that, again, in terms of the behavior, they're more likely to listen to what their doctors tell them to do. They're more likely to willingly get their health checkups, go to the clinic, and sort of keep up with their own state of health. Less happy people are much less likely to do that, and that has a direct impact on their health. Another mechanism through which this works, when people experience more positive emotions, that has an influence on what's happening inside of us. So in terms of inflammation, that those levels of inflammation are much reduced under the experience of positive emotions relative to when you're anxious, when you're angry, when you're depressed, those levels go through the roof. But even stress hormones, when you're not feeling as good as you could, it's kind of like you've turned the motor on. The stress hormones are running for no good reason other than maybe you're struggling in your life, you're less optimistic than you could be, and that puts a lot of wear and tear on our cardiovascular system, our immune system, lymphatic system, et cetera, et cetera. So there's some direct mechanisms, indirect mechanisms through which a state of happiness is good for our health. And I'm going to add one more piece. So increasingly, there's a number of longitudinal studies where we track people over time that are showing that happiness is now causal. So causal means a state of happiness causes good health. Whereas maybe in studies, in years previous, the best we could get to was linked to, associated
mm,
with. And now we're saying, no, it causes good health. So again,
nice.
one more reason to start paying attention to happiness. It's not just oh, it'll help your day go by better. Already that's important, but it's a huge influence on our state of health. And it's really something that healthcare should be paying attention to as much as individuals and governments are already paying attention to.
Right. And it makes it more than just like a correlation kind of exercise or causation, right? I like that because a lot of the times, when you're talking about eating healthy, well, are they happy because they're not eating, ultra processed junk food? And which is first, the happiness or the food? And where does it start? Like, is there kind of so far, has it ever been studied or come out in a study that there's like a beginning genesis point
So
of
again,
happiness?
that's difficult to do in research. Again, it's the chicken or the egg, and things mutually influence each other.
Mhm.
But again, and look, statisticians are way smarter than me, so I just make friends with them and kind of help them do our studies together. But lots of good studies looking at the direction of influence to really start unpacking this question. Is it happier people who just end up being healthier? So if you're happy, you're probably more likely to go for a bike ride anyway, which would improve your health. And if you go for a bike ride, does that make you happier? Yeah, probably, except today because it's really hot. But so it's that
Yeah.
influence goes both ways. But there's increasingly now studies showing that actually both of these are true. So when you are happier, you're more likely to engage in health promoting behaviors, but health promotion also increases a state of happiness as well. So these two kind of go hand in hand, but definitely happiness influences health on its own, not just through those behaviors as well. And while I've got you, while we're talking about this topic, maybe this is a good place to talk about the study that we just completed
Hmm.
here in the UAE. So it's under review at the moment. So I'm hoping it'll get published very soon. But we looked at a nationally representative sample here in the UAE of 9,855 UAE residents and nationals. And this was data that was collected from one of the government ministries. So it's solid data. And we looked at a number of different factors. So, self-rated health, satisfaction with healthcare, anxiety, levels of happiness, depression, how many minutes people exercise. I mean, we looked at a whole bunch of things. And we found three major findings. One, anxious people are less happy. Anxiety kind of wears a bit on a state of happiness. Okay. Now, the two other findings are really relative to what we're talking about today. And that was healthier people are also happier. So healthier defined by the people who did more physical activity. I think it was 30 minutes 3 times a week or something. Oh, I need to go back and look at that, but there was a specific number of minutes.
Hmm.
Also, people who slept more were also happier. And this corresponds to other research that we know just, when you're tired, it's harder to manage your emotions. Um, and then the third thing that we found, and this is the one I really got excited about, is that a state of happiness, greater experience of positive emotions predicted a state of health. So
Mm.
again, we saw the influence go both ways, but for the first time, we're like, yeah, we did it. We actually found that relationship here in the UAE, and we can put that evidence in addition to all the range of other studies now globally starting to show the same thing. Happiness produces a state of health.
I love that. And it's
Me too.
wonderful to have evidence showing that because it's difficult to sometimes explain to, again, doctors, corporations, governments, or even individuals if there's no proof or evidence like as to why should I do that or why should I care about that.
Yeah.
And now that you actually have the evidence to do it, that's really wonderful.
And yet, I don't know, honestly, I feel like we're very suspicious of happiness because we accept the evidence. And in healthcare, we do. There's lots of studies that have been conducted for decades now. This isn't new, but we have lots of studies showing how, you know, a trait anger,
Mm.
the type A personality, anger, cynicism, high stress, this predicts heart attacks. So we accept the premise that negative emotions influence health, but somehow we're like, oh no, but it's not possible with positive emotions. But why wouldn't it? Emotions are emotions. One just goes
Hmm.
this way, the other one goes that way, but it affects our state of health.
Absolutely. It's so true. And we have a lot of people listening to this podcast that either have diabetes or someone they love has diabetes. And I can see it if you wear a continuous glucose monitor and if you're watching your blood sugar, and that affects so many organs and things in our body. And if you're happy, you will probably notice that your blood sugars are better. They are more easier to manage. Yes, there's up to 52 different things that, or 50 some odd things that could affect your blood sugar. And sometimes even then it's difficult to explain. But for sure, if you are happy, you will have better outcomes. And I'm not always explaining it in such like a minute way, but especially when it comes to, I mean, anyone really, adults, children, but do things you love, that you enjoy, that make you happy, make you feel good. And then they won't be easy, but they get a little bit easier. You'll feel better. And you'll see that in a lot of the numbers and things that you have. So I love that you have evidence that supports that.
Excellent.
So how much of this is genetic? Is there
Lots.
any of it?
Yeah.
Lots.
So there's a model that it has been more or less accepted by a researcher called Sonia Lyubomirsky. And she talks about, oh, what is it called again? The sustainable, oh gosh, I've suddenly forgotten. Anyway, but I remember the percentages. And happiness is 50% genetic,
Oh.
which makes people sometimes like, yeah, my parents were really optimistic, happy people. That's great. And other people are like, oh gosh,
It's
depression
like, is your
runs in the
glass full
family.
or half empty?
Um, so genetics, I'm not going to lie, plays a big role. And
Mm,
genetics really impacts, all that brain chemistry, but also in like that genetics also influences, the nature versus nurture, how you grow up as well. So if you're growing up with parents that are really grumpy and angry and depressed or what have you, those behaviors, that way of seeing the world can sort of, make its way to you. So genetics is a big piece. 40%, I'll say the 10%. 10% is our circumstances in life. That is very disappointing to people sometimes because they think, what? 10%? No, but I want to believe I'm unhappy because of my divorce, because of, I hate my job, because of this, this, this. And 10% is over your lifetime. So at
mm,
any given moment, if you're going through, you hate your job, your manager's impossible, you're raising teenagers, I'm sorry, and you're having problems in your marriage, like it feels like it's 100%, it's everything. And at that moment, yeah, it's huge and it's going to influence how you think, how you feel, what you do. It's big. But over your lifetime, that kind of gets watered down over time, and our circumstances aren't really a great place to blame low happiness because circumstances resolve. And that's why 40% then, and this is the bigger piece of the pie, and it's really what we can control. Our behaviors, our thoughts, our choice in relationships, our attitude, our willingness to get up and go even after we've failed. So everything that we can control thereafter is 40%. Now, is 60 bigger than 40? Yeah, but 40 is still bigger than 2, So it's big enough, and that's where positive psychology is really important because it teaches us what we call positive psychology interventions, PPIs. And these are different, again, empirically validated strategies that people can use over time to raise their levels of well-being and keep them there. And that's the key. A lot of things make us happy, but by the time you hit the parking lot, it kind of goes down again. So we're always
mhm.
looking for strategies that'll keep people up. Now, things happen in life, you're going to go down, but that you have a chronic state of happiness instead of a chronic state of unhappiness.
And if you're, it might depend from, vary from person to person or depend on the situation. If someone is dealing with 10%, like, oh, yeah, that feels really low. But if someone's dealing with like a challenging time in life or a lot of people probably know people going through challenging things. Um, and we don't want to, not empathize with
Yeah,
that. But
yeah. I mean, these are
how,
real things. Yeah,
yeah, they
yeah.
are real and they're hard. And what is kind of the first step, or is there something that someone can do to, even though while they're going through the muck and trying to figure everything out as they're going through the big traumatic thing, what's the first step or some of the first steps? What can they do to kind of counterbalance that, I guess, for lack of a better word?
Yeah. So the first thing, never force yourself to be happy because this just adds one extra thing to be stressed about. Like, so,
Hmm.
you know, that's not going to help you. And there's a time for negative emotions. If somebody's just died, it's okay. Let yourself grieve. Like that's the
Hmm.
point. So I don't want anybody listening to this thinking, oh, I have to like force myself to be happy and pretend everything's no, don't do that. Actually, and we have lots of good research showing that the harder people try to be happy, the worse it is. So
Mm.
if there's reason to be down, be down. It's all right. You have permission because there's lots that we can learn from those moments as well. But the key is also keep things in perspective and just be mindful of how long am I going to allow myself to stay in
Hmm.
this place. So some time is okay. Some time is expected. Some time is normal. Some time is actually good for you. And the quicker you try to get out of things sometimes, the longer it lasts. So you kind of have to listen to yourself and see, what's going to work or not. But there's kind of going to be a time at which you say, okay, I think it's time now to do something else. Like I'm getting tired of being tired. I'm getting
Mm,
tired of being low. Like even now, this is lots for me to carry. So sometimes maybe you will need support from a psychologist who's focused on problems, and that is going to be very helpful. And at other times, maybe it's a change of perspective, a change of seeing things differently, a change of, what is going well in my life. So maybe I have this chronic disease like diabetes, but wow, my kids are great. They make me laugh every day. Like they're hilarious. Or, my partner's really supportive. Or I don't have a partner, but you know what? My friends are awesome. They call me like 3 times a week and we go and do great things. Or my job is really interesting. I like it. I'm paid well. I have a job these days, right? Like
mm,
job hugging, take what you can.
hmm.
Um, so it's about, kind of looking at what's going well and what can we pull from that? And then slowly, it's also thinking about how can I start implementing little tiny habits to get that ROI out of life, to pull a little bit more out of it. So one of the things that I do is and literally write a list. What are the things that have made you happy in the past? Even if it's really small. I love coffee. If anybody tries to take coffee out of my cold hands in the morning,
Showing my cup for those of you listening and don't see the video.
there will be a price to pay.
Yes.
I like coffee. Do not try, these people are like, never have caffeine in the morning. No, 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 no. I need my coffee in the morning because I like it. So I literally will have a list. I like coffee in the morning. I like singing in the car. I like reading a proper newspaper, the kind where
Oh,
you
I
get your
love
fingers
that.
dirty. Oh,
Right.
now it takes me a long time to read, and sometimes I'm reading 2-month-old news. I don't care. I like it.
Yeah.
I I like plants. I've got plants all over my apartment, and I talk to my little plants and I plant little tomatoes and find what works for you. Stop listening
Hmm.
to influencers. Stop listening to people like me. Find what works for you. And trying to find those little pockets of joy because I think also our definition of happiness, people think if I'm happy, you're happy all the time and there's, disco ball and confetti falling from the sky. Nobody's happy like that. Nobody's happy like that. It's little moments throughout the day that we accumulate that build a good life.
Yeah.
Now, in the things that you do, we also want to think about relationships. So, do your friends bring out the best in you? If they don't, find new ones. Like really, it's as simple as that. Do your activities give you a sense of freedom and joy and play and energize you? If not, find those. And that could be bike riding, it could be tennis, it could be taking a walk. Do you have activities that also calm you? So all types of positive emotions are good calm, satisfaction, serenity, peace, but also, yay, excitement. I'm going to a
Hmm.
concert, right? Like any positive emotion is going to have that impact, that physical impact. That is exactly what we're looking for. So my advice, when people ask, what should I do? Look, there's lots of scientifically proven interventions, and many of us have heard of them gratitude, appreciation, savoring, capitalization. There's so many. And then there's also what works for you. If it's worked in the past, it's probably going to work again.
Hmm.
So do more of that. So everybody has had one good day in their life.
For
Everybody's had
sure.
one. And that's really where you want to be thinking about how was I different on that day? Was I
Hmm.
more open? Was I, was I nicer? Was I kinder? Did I get good sleep back then? Did I do more exercise? Did I just say yes to life a lot more? Equally, did I say no to things I didn't want to do or which didn't serve me? Do more of that.
Nice. That's excellent life advice. Like that we should all kind of, I think, take inventory of on a regular basis. That's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah. We all know what works.
Yeah. And so when you started to get into, positive psychology and happiness and things like that, what was it that really motivated you to focus on this area?
That people were changing. So I worked in
Mm,
mental health for many years. Um, depression, anxiety, major mental health issues, schizophrenia, murder. I mean, you see everything. And I was doing therapy groups for people with depression, and they got depressing, right? I'm not gonna lie. And I was like, I don't think this is working. Like people get a little bit less depressed, but they're still not living good lives.
mm,
And when you only get less depressed, you eventually go back to feeling depressed because you haven't learned the skills to build a better life. And we haven't moved you up the scale, if you will, into the positives. You're still in the negatives. You're not past the point. You're not past that 0 point into the positives. So people would continuously be coming back. And then I was doing my doctorate at the same time. And I saw this course in positive psychology, and I thought, all right, I need a good grade. How hard can this be? It's about happiness and whatever. And it changed my whole world. And I thought, this is what I thought psychology was actually about. And it turns out it wasn't, but this is what it should be about. So there were lots of research coming out about the different interventions. I approached my managers at the time and said, look, I'd like to do a happiness program. To which they thought, oh, cute. No. And I'm like, no, 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 but wait. So I had to like build a whole case. Here's what the early evidence says. And look, it can't be worse than what we're doing. And they're like, yeah,
mm.
okay, fair enough. And so we tried it. We did a 6 week clinical happiness program for patients in primary healthcare that were diagnosed with depression, but also low happiness, that were also struggling with different chronic health issues, just kind of not doing great. And we started teaching them these skills, and suddenly people were like, where has this been my whole life? I've been going
Wow.
through mental health for how many years, and all you ever teach me is how to be less miserable. And now I learned how to experience joy, how to generate interest and curiosity, how to appreciate what's in my life instead of writing endlessly about, what a bad day I had and examining my thoughts and trying to challenge my negative thoughts. Let's focus on this instead. And really, our outcomes were good. And so that got published as a study, and anybody can Google it and they can find it. But that really drove home this notion of primary health care should be focusing on happiness if we're focused on health outcomes. So simply reducing ill-being is not getting us the outcomes that we want. I'm not saying it's bad, but we can do better. So we have more science today that shows us how to reduce misery and how to improve happiness, and that will get us the outcomes that we want. So that's my takeaway message.
No, nice. Do you feel like now that there is more of a focus and awareness of positive psychology, that we have fewer clinically depressed people by definition? Because before, I mean, not to make
Eh,
light of depression and other things, but there's definitely a difference between clinical depression and maybe not being happy, but were they just all lumped together before as
Yes.
one diagnosis?
Yeah. Yeah. And somebody with low happiness, again, we have our own measures for happiness. So
Hmm.
again, we can measure levels of subjective well-being, life satisfaction, positive and negative emotional experiences. We can measure all that. So there is a difference between somebody who has low happiness, actually we call that languishing, and that in itself is a risk factor for depression.
Mm,
So when you're not high enough on the scale of happiness, it almost acts like Velcro and it pulls you back down. And that's where the skills for happiness are really important. So again, just reducing depression, that's not enough. I also think today, and there's studies to support this, the more we talk about mental health issues, it's like a double-edged sword. In one
Hmm.
way, maybe the diagnoses are increasing and people are saying, oh, that's me. And they might not have done it before. So does that mean there's necessarily more? Or does it mean we're asking better questions and just finding the people who have mental health issues, but we didn't know about before? That's one
Yeah.
argument. And and there's truth to that. There's also truth to the more we talk about mental health issues, the more everybody thinks they have a mental health issue.
Right. I've seen that in, yeah, certain people and having, being around kids and teenagers, and they're so much more aware of things than we were, or at least than I was, I should say. I shouldn't say we, not putting it on anyone, but the things that they're aware of. And I think it's largely because of social media or,
TikTok.
just
Yep.
TikTok, yeah, or even just internet, right? Having access to information is wonderful, but in sound bites, you could potentially have a lot of different conditions that haven't been really well assessed by a professional and come to the conclusion that, oh, that sounds like me. Like if I'm having a slow day or feeling low and I see a video and I'm like, I have all those things. Oh,
And it has led to an overdiagnosis.
mm.
Overdiagnosis of mental health issues as well, particularly in young people. And I think we're having a hard time also distinguishing between a mental health issue and difficult living. Like life is hard.
Life is hard. Yeah, I was just going to say the same exact thing. Life
Life
is
is
not
hard.
easy. It's not, as they say, it's not all kittens and rainbows all the time or unicorns or
Yeah.
whichever.
And that doesn't mean you have a mental health issue. That means
Right.
you had a bad day and you had a bad week. But that's not a mental health issue. That's a different thing.
Yeah.
And so it's also other research, kind of questioning are kids as resilient as maybe they were when,
Mm.
probably you and I played street hockey when we were 8, walked to the post office or walked to the school. I walked to school myself every day. I lived in a small town. Even in winter when it was minus 40, put
Yeah.
a
I
hat
didn't live
on.
it. I didn't live anywhere where it was minus 40.
Okay, well, I'm
That
Canadian, so my parents are
yeah.
like, go to
I was
school. Like,
I was
what's your
extreme
problem?
opposite. It was like plus 40. So there
Okay.
you go. But
You know, and
yes.
and today we drive kids to school, so there's a lot of skills that we got as young people that helped us be a little
Mm,
tougher, and that helped us navigate some of these difficult situations. Now, young people, in a way, especially in Dubai, everybody's got a driver, a cook, and a nanny, and a this and a that. And yes, it's wonderful, but it's also robbing us of a lot of
mhm.
these skills that would help us be more resilient and tolerate a bad day and not be like, oh, I'm all overwhelmed. I have a mental health issue. No, you don't. That's just a bad day. That's
Yeah.
actually normal. That's a bad day.
Yeah, it's hard to know the bad days. Even the things that,
Yeah.
I talked about teenagers, if I doubt any of them listen to me, to be honest. To the
They
to the
generally
pod
don't.
to the
You should
podcast.
get on
No
TikTok.
offense. No, no. I have a TikTok account and for a time there was once a time in marketing. I'm like, I don't have time, like really. I mean, it's a wildly successful platform, but I was just like I much prefer like the written word and other
Me
things and
too.
podcasting
Yeah.
and whatever. So not for me. And even my son and his friends, they're not as much on TikTok as they used to be. They watch things in Instagram, they communicate in Instagram, but it's
Okay.
still kind of the
Yeah,
same
yeah.
thing. But where was I going with this? Oh, because yeah, I kind of called out teenagers, but even adults, like the algorithm, okay, the platforms, they know your age. So the things that they send me, relate to women my age, a little bit of menopause, different life things, and all of this other stuff. And then, you start feeling bad and or the if I pay attention to it, the first thing that's there are things that are going to make me feel bad and outraged about
Yes.
my life. or I should be looking a certain way or dressing a certain way. And I still don't want to dress in those ways, but yes, they're constantly, trying to tell you what's wrong with you or what's wrong with your relationships, and it's
And
difficult.
and over time the narrative becomes compelling and believable.
It does, especially for a young mind like a teenager. That's why I think I highlight it for the teens because
Yeah.
they're more easily influenced than I think a lot of adults are. A lot of adults are influenced, and I get a lot of questions about certain things sometimes, and you can, understand that, yeah, they've heard this message a lot, but it's not always true or deep enough to really draw a conclusion.
And I think the other thing that is happening, this might make me very unpopular to say, but
Just
um,
provocative,
it's
provocative, not
okay. I'll just
unpopular.
say it.
It's
I think it's
provocative.
it's a rewarding narrative.
Mm,
So, when I was doing these first happiness groups years ago, one of the ladies in this group, and I always talk about her just because honestly, she's my hero. Um, she was the one who was most angry with us. And she said, I've been coming to mental, like she was actually like really angry. I've been coming to mental health for years, and you all made me think there was something wrong with me. But, and then when she finally come down, she explained it. She said, this has been my identity for years. This
mm,
is now who I am. People know me as a sad, depressed person. And she found it difficult to become happier. She was feeling happier, but to actually show it because now people are like, are you okay? Like people didn't believe it. So changing our identity, and sometimes that includes being known as somebody maybe who's struggling with anxiety, depression, whatever it
mhm.
is hard to change because now other people will look at you differently. They will experience you differently, but you too will experience yourself
Hmm.
differently. And sometimes it is comfortable in a bad kind of comfortable way to kind of fit with that identity. So
Right.
it's costly to come out of seeing the world a certain way. It's not
Yeah.
easy to just suddenly say, okay, I'm going to be
No.
happy because people react to that. So I think, again, and I think the point I was trying to make is if you think about it in the workplace, there's this huge mental health agenda. And again, I'm not against it. Like for people who have mental health issues, we need that. That's important. Mental health issues drastically reduce years of life, productivity. They're very costly. They drain healthcare systems. We need to attend to those. But because it's the only narrative, how do
Hmm.
you get attention or the care that you need if you're not quite there, but you're not quite here? Well, you
Hmm.
kind of have to say, I have a mental health issue, and now people will take you seriously. We don't have the words to say, I don't have a mental health issue, but I'm languishing
Yeah.
and and
Yeah.
and I'm struggling with that. My life is boring. I feel I don't have any goals at the moment. Conversations drain me. I'm not depressed, but I'm just, I need more in my life because that's also a different intervention. But we don't take that
Yes.
seriously
Yep.
and we don't have the words for that. And that's where I feel like we need that vocabulary to start educating people on what is happiness, what are mental health issues. We've done a good job here, but anything other than that, we don't have the words for.
Right. Yeah. And if you walked into you talk about like corporate health and mental health, I still think there's a lot of places where I think of the places I worked in the past that were supposed to be great companies, right? I mean, and okay, I'm not saying supposed to be, should say it like they are, but
Yeah.
I'm not going to walk into HR and be like, hey, I had this mental health issue. Or probably, like you said, even now, even worse, if you walk in and you're like, just everything feels stale and I'm not motivated, then they're just going to look at you and be like, okay, well, she's not ready for promotion or anything. So it's not going to be taken very seriously, and people won't be very forthcoming in the first place to really
Yeah.
share that probably.
And yet it's a risk factor for depression. It's a risk factor for so many things, including health issues. So we need to get better. Even healthcare workers need to get better at identifying, you know, we also need to get better at identifying depression and mental health issues, but even a step above that, we need to get better at asking, how happy are you in your life these days?
Hmm.
Because somebody's going to say, well, yeah, it's okay. Ah, you're at risk here.
Yeah. And I like that you bring up healthcare because what I find, so in chronic conditions, and I may have shared this with you before when a doctor came up to me during a training I was doing about healthcare coaching and diabetes and the language that we use when we're speaking to people with diabetes. And she was a doctor, and she said, I have to really thank you for this because I have a sister who lives with diabetes, and I never thought once to ask her how she was doing. She only focused on the clinical. And I think that's maybe a lot of the challenge of chronic condition, just in the context of chronic conditions and happiness and how are you? And yes, your doctors, nurses, other healthcare providers, you're trained to be very clinical, and that's what you're focusing on. But in the case of chronic condition, if you really want to see changes and improvements, as you pointed out earlier, the linkage to that is focusing on general happiness, how people are doing, and all of these concepts that you've been talking about has such a huge impact.
It's enormous. In fact, I think these lifestyle factors are more influential than the disease itself.
A lot of the
So,
times, yes.
sleeping, nutrition, mood, relationships, stress at work, a sense of meaning and purpose, like all of this impacts directly illness, and we only ever ask about illness. So, really, we've got this magnificent picture of data, and we're only going to look at the corner 10% and intervene there. We have so many other intervention points that could act as very powerful levers to better health, but also better mental health in the true sense of the word, also better social health, how we get along with people. Like there's tremendous value in happiness.
So, in the healthcare context, then what is either like the one thing or the big thing, or how should a person working in healthcare approach mental health and well-being? What is the best way that they can bring that into the conversation or even start to look at that?
Yeah. So I'm having conversations with a lot of these healthcare institutions, getting the predictable, huh? And some of them are like, oh, we need to do this. So a lot of them are kind of go back to that research. It's in the medical research. And a lot of them are starting to realize that again, happiness drives outcome. So there's kind of two things that they were talking about now. And one is how do we develop skills for healthcare workers in interviewing skills, but also using some of these interventions with patients. So, just a simple question, how happy are you in your life these days? Not just, do you suffer from depression? Do you suffer from
Mm.
anxiety? Do you,
I'm like, I don't know. Yes, all of them.
but again, if I'm just low on happiness but not depressed, my answer is going to be no, I'm not depressed because that's all you asked me. So we need to include happiness as an important question as part of those interviews. Are you satisfied with your relationships these days? How many friends do you have? Like that's a good question, especially in mental
Hmm.
health. One friend makes the difference between somebody committing suicide or not. So
Wow.
asking that question is very important. Um, are you working? How would you describe work? Do you find it meaningful? Is it purposeful? Do you like going to work? So, all of these questions are important. And then the interventions. What are you grateful for in your life these days? Or what do you do for fun? I always ask that question. What do you do for fun? And everyone else looks at me like, why are we having this conversation? Well, A, it's something for us to talk about, but B, it helps me know what's a source of positive emotional experience for you. And
Hmm.
I can prescribe it back to you later when you forget that you actually do enjoy tennis, and that's going to be the new intervention, right? So asking these broader questions, that's one way, but also using these strategies on themselves. Look, healthcare workers have some of the highest rates of burnout, stress. It's not easy working in a healthcare institution. You have
For
patients on
sure.
one side, doctors on the other, administrators on the other, mounds of paperwork. You're often working, you know, urgencies, emergencies. There's a lot. So a lot of these strategies are really good for healthcare workers in themselves. When they're happier, they also sleep better, they're nicer to work with, they are kinder to patients, they're more curious, they're more patient, like a lot changes for them. The third place is teaching patients these skills. So we teach patients in primary healthcare or in tertiary care, how to eat well, how to, move more, how to, do the insulin, whatever.
Hmm.
And then we stop.
Yeah.
Okay, but so why not take that a step further into saying we're going to add two more modules on that course where you can learn the skills to greater life satisfaction, to generate more positive emotional experiences, because that is also going to be a tremendous impact on your health. So there's a lot of ways in which we can use this, and I just really encourage healthcare in general to look at the whole range of human experience, whether it's mental and physical, and to bring that into healthcare if we're really committed to better healthcare outcomes.
That's so true. And I've seen the evolution of a lot of the discussion around psychology, the psychosocial aspect of diabetes, and in the context of pediatric, because that's where I've been most invited to speak, but also for others with like type 2 diabetes and different things. And it's only been maybe in the last 10 years or so when they first started. The research is still early. But now when I see case studies presented in these meetings, only now they're asking a little bit more complex questions like here's a case study, uncontrolled diabetes, and there's A, B, C, D, E, F, G also happening in the person's life.
Yeah.
And the majority of the things that can be I don't want to use the word correction, but the majority of the changes that can
Modified.
yeah, modified don't have to do with the clinical things that they learned in medical school. It almost always goes back to something to do with the psychosocial state, the positive psychology state. We're not talking depression or anxiety or anything severe like that. 9 times out of 10, it has to do with all the things that we've talked about today. And to me, it should seem so obvious, but I think sometimes, especially clinicians, cannot see it because they're only taught to be so hyper focused on the clinical and not look at the broader picture and how that both are important, but looking at how they all fit together and how they all complement each other is so critical. But I'm only seeing it now. I say now, it's only been in the last few years that this is becoming more mainstream conversation. But
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong.
No, and I'd agree. It is getting better. But I think the clue is in the word that you used. You said they only think clinical, but happiness is also clinical. Optimism is clinical. So having a good state of, uh, you know, um, a very well functioning immune system, that is clinical.
Yeah.
So we need to learn how to see that these are health assets, psychosocial assets. These are clinical factors. But what we are looking at generally is what's the problematic factor instead of the
Hmm.
protective factor or the promotive factor. And that's where we need to kind of get better at seeing that whole range of human experience. And we are trained to ask about problems. We should, but we also need to get better about asking about opportunities and what's going well, because we can capitalize on that and use those levers for better healthcare outcomes too.
Yeah, I would love to see people equally as excited about the happiness and psychology discussions as about like the new pharmaceutical interventions. Those are exciting too and have their place. But yeah, I just, you really, yes, those are, happiness is clinical too. I think
Yeah,
that is so critical.
yeah. And again, that evidence is there. It's not like it's a brand new thing. That evidence has been there for about 25 years now. So, other studies that I've done are looking at, comparing the rate of what we call CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy for
Hmm.
depression, antidepressant medication, and positive psychology interventions. And positive psychology interventions, 9 times out of 10 is on par, equal to, or superior to. So these things work, but we keep ignoring or overlooking that other option. It's right there and it's so cheap. Just to do
Right.
2 gratitude letters per week. It doesn't even cost anything, but we would prefer to prescribe the really expensive medication, which also has
Mm,
side effects.
yes.
Anyway, that's my rant.
No, so I kept you, like I said, we could easily talk about this all day. So one more question before I let you
Yeah.
go, if I may.
Yep.
The future of happiness, looking ahead, what do we know what to expect? Any changes, anything different than the way that we're already starting to look? I know it's still
I,
kind of new, so it feels maybe it's too soon to ask about the future because there's so much exciting stuff happening right now, but going forward,
I see the
what can we expect?
sources and the interventions to happiness. Those are pretty stable. And I'm glad they're stable. They don't rely on technology. They're not expensive. You don't need equipment to do it. Ask curious questions at your next dinner party. Okay, that's easy, right? Be a little bit more optimistic. So these strategies aren't difficult, but what I do see is we're applying them in so many other places. So we're using the scientificness of, I just made up that word, of these interventions and applying them at a public health layer, um, primary health care. We're applying it in schools, we're applying it in workplaces, because again, there's a tremendous amount of value in happier people. Again, it's why governments recognize it. And now it's really about how do we apply it in a systematic way, measuring outcomes. So I don't see that there's going to be a change necessarily, but a broader application and proliferation of their use. We may discover a few other strategies, but generally they're the nice moments in life that are shared between people. It's a perspective, it's a mindset, and it's these just sometimes ridiculous moments. You're caught singing in your car to the radio at a red light and somebody sees you.
When you talk about singing, I've had that happen, but kind of ridiculous moments. Before we started recording, you asked me what I did this weekend, and when we were talking about singing, I remembered I went to karaoke with some of my really
Ah,
close
nice.
girlfriends.
Okay.
It was ridiculous. It was hysterical, and it was so much fun. And
Perfect.
I was in like a low mood before I arrived, and they're like, "No, we're changing it." And I left so
Nice.
happy. So yeah,
Nice.
sing more.
Yes, sing more.
Sing more.
Yes. It comes down to that.
It
Sing in your
does.
car and you're good
Sing
to
in your
go.
car. Yes. Not everyone has to hear. People may have wished I was singing in my car after that point, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's all good.
That'll be another recording.
No, I won't be recording that anytime. Thank you so much, Dr. Louise Lambert, for joining me today on the podcast. And I just really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you did too. We got to hear about how happiness is scientific. It's not just woo, it's not just get on with your life and do it. There were some really concrete, solid, evidential things, evidence-based things, I should say, not evidential, evidence-based things that we discussed. And a lot of steps that we can take personally, a lot of steps that you can take professionally if you want to incorporate more happiness into your organization. And if you check the show notes, if you want to get in touch with Dr. Louise, we'll have all her links where you can find her, her website, and other things in the show notes. So please reach out anytime. Thank you so much for joining us today on another episode of Dialogue, the Diapoint Podcast.